Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In his work on moral virtue, Plutarch is assuming but also articulating and defending a Platonic moral psychology in which there are parts of the soul. There's a rational part, which really ought to be in charge, and then there's an irrational part with which we feel our emotions and desires, an affective part, if you like, which should ideally not just be listening to the rational part, but guided by it, shaped by it. And one of the other big schools of ancient philosophy, the Stoics, says, well, no, it's not like that. There's just one single ruling part of the soul. Plutarch argues against that, and then he considers a counter-argument they might make, saying, listen, there isn't any real conflict between different parts of the soul. The one part can just have conflict within it between reason and emotion. It can go from one to the other. And they say, look, in the deliberative, or as he's going to say, thinking faculty, the highest part that you think, don't you already have conflicts there? And the way he frames it is, isn't the deliberative faculty of a human being, the bouleutique, often divided, dichophore, literally carried off in two different directions and drawn into anthekeletai, opposed opinions, so opinions that are contrary to each other, about, for example, what's actually useful or advantageous, right? The sum ferrum, one of the main things that we do in fact have to think about. Would it be more useful for me to take this course of action or this one, right? And we can use other things here, the beautiful and the ugly, the good and the bad, the just and the unjust. Don't we sometimes differ in our own minds about these matters? We're torn in different directions, we could say. And Plutarch is going to say, well, sure, of course that occurs, but that doesn't mean that the faculty is opposing itself the way that you Stoics make the ruling faculty seemingly have this conflict within it. Instead, it's just applying itself to two different matters, two different lines of reasoning, logis moi, right, reasoning processes, or to different objects, which are providing themselves with arguments. So he says there's just one single faculty of reason which functions on things that are different to each other. And what's really interesting about this is not his response to that, but what he's going to unpack from it, the other things that come up. So he's going to go on and say, when you're not having pain in reasoning because passion is absent and you're not forced to choose a course that is contrary to reason, actually judgment would be a better way, gnomen, what you've resolved upon, then you don't really have a problem. But when pain is present in reasoning, or you do find yourself forced to choose against your own better judgment, what's going on there? He says, well, that is because some emotion or passion, in a very broad sense, has snuck in, right? He actually uses the term for like deceiving or being forgotten. Sneaking in is a good way to put it. So some emotion got itself involved in the process, and he's going to give you some examples, but he says that he uses the metaphor of like you're balancing between two things. Should I go this way? Should I go this way? The emotion attaches itself to the balance. You don't actually see it, and it's drawing it down, and you're like, okay, I guess that's the better reasoning. So what would be some examples of this? He says, it's not actually reasoning, opposing reasoning in these cases. So it's not a logismon that is, going to battle, anti binontos, stepping against another reasoning. Instead, it's things like these. Ambition, philotimias, right? This desire to be held in esteem by other people, to have people like you, say good things about you, right? Or contentiousness, a desire to win, philonekias, right? It actually comes from the word nikate, victory. I want to be the one in charge, right? Or, like he says, the pursuit of favor, charitos. Or, this is a really interesting one, jealousy, zelotupias, right? Or even fear. All of those things can get involved in our reasoning processes and give some of them an extra weight that we don't realize they have. And because we're not paying close attention, we think it's actually a difference between two reasons. But we find out that that reason winds up being, we could say, infected by or colored by emotion. So, here's an example in the verse. To refuse, they were ashamed. Refusing is one option, but feared to accept, right? Accepting is another option. And shame and fear, two different emotions going against each other. To die is dreadful, fearful, right? But brings fair fame. Not to die is craven, but there's pleasure there. Literally joy in not dying. And he goes on and he says, when we're judging suits concerning business affairs, the passions rush in unawares and cause the greatest waste of time. If we were smart, we would try to keep people from indulging in or appealing to their emotions. He even talks about in certain states, the magistrates don't allow political speakers to make passionate harangues. Why? Because if you let reason alone, provided people are, otherwise not screwing up, it is going to incline to what's right, to what's true, to what's just. But if passion intervenes, as he says, the part of the soul that feels pleasure and pain fights and opposes the part which forms judgments and deliberates. So, you may not notice it happening, but your reason can get altered, swayed by the various sets of emotions. And there are many of them that can influence us. He's going to contrast this with what goes on, as he says, in philosophy. Now, this doesn't mean that every time that we're doing philosophy, it's necessarily like this. I certainly have seen my share of professors arguing with each other in the halls, calling each other names, getting so angry with each other that they're red in the face and kind of spitting when they're talking. Obviously, we're talking about when philosophy is going right. But he says something really interesting here. He says that in philosophy, we don't have a feeling of pain when, under the influence of those who hold different opinions, we change our views again and again. We say, well, I think I was wrong about this. I'll look at things in a different way. And do you know who he brings up with this? He says, Aristotle himself would change his mind about things. Originally, he was much more of a Platonist, and he decided a different point of view was better. Democritus, another important philosopher. Chrysippus, one of the very important Stoic scholarchs, right? If they could change their mind about things because they said, well, this is the better reasoning than the one that I'm currently following, and they weren't bothered by it, that's because there wasn't a lot of emotion involved. So he talks about being without pain. Lupe is pain or trouble or disturbance. He also talks about not being dismayed. Athorubos, right? So not being troubled. And then there's another thing that gets translated as without pain, but it's actually a really interesting Greek term that we often translate quite literally as gnawing. So think about, when you feel like you're torn up inside or you're lacerating yourself, you're grinding your teeth, right? Adektos. Is without it. Dektos is, that sort of gnawing that's happening there. But instead, with pleasure, right? So Aristotle can say, this idea, this opinion that I held, I'm going to let it go, and I'm happy to be better informed. Why? Well, because in these cases, passion is not opposing what he calls the contemplative, and it's translated here as scientific, but actually it should be translated as learning part of the soul, the mathematikon, right? It's coming from mathesis, the learning activity. So he says that the irrational part remains quiet and it doesn't meddle with these matters. Reason, when the truth appears, dismisses the false, gladly inclines towards the truth. It's in reason, not its opposite, that the faculty resides, which yields to persuasion and changes opinion. Now, that's a nice way of looking at things. Some people are capable of it. What's it like for most people, including probably a lot of philosophers? So he says, in the majority of people, in many people, their practical deliberations, their boulai, right, the things they decide on, their judgments, their krises, and it's translated here as decisions, but better commitments, can even mean like a way of life, their diaitai, tend to be infected by emotion, right? The Greek term there is actually empathes. They are in emotion or in passion. And so they're going to be biased. They're going to be off, right? So that's going to be a problem. And they don't actually realize that that's happening. So, we get problems, obstructions, and difficulties to the path of reason. Reason is checked and confused by the irrational with some emotion of pleasure, pain, fear, desire, rises up to oppose it. And he says, in these sorts of cases, the senses or perception, aesthesis, is the decider, is the criterion. And that's probably not good, right? You want reason to be the decider, but reason is already caught up in the struggle, so we resort to something else. Instead, we might say our sensibilities. And if our sensibilities are well structured, great. But if we're already in this problem, maybe they're not. And so he says, on the other hand, when we have deliberations and speculations where passion is absent, like philosophical ones, if they're equally balanced, well, we don't make a judgment. We just realize that there's some sort of perplexity, and we suspend our intellectual activity because of opposing probabilities. If we can say that one is stronger than the other, then we decide for that, and we do so without bringing in the weight of emotion into it. So he says that, in general, when it looks like reason is opposing reason, there's no perception of them as two distinct things, but a single thing which arises, as we said, in different impressions or different appearances. And he uses the word here, phantasias, right? which is a Stoic term but is also used by other philosophers. It includes all sorts of things, which could be reasonings or could be just appearances or impressions or stuff like that. So, it's not that the single faculty is divided against itself. Rather, it's possible for the rational, deliberative, theoretical faculty to be considering two different lines of reasoning, and it can either do so calmly, like it does in philosophy, or it can do so with emotions involved, and then probably that's going to tip the balance to some degree and lead us into making some poorly thought out decisions in favor of one line of reasoning over the other.